Hello, everyone. Just have to keep my voice down because my mom is trying to sleep in the next room. She's having a lot of trouble sleeping lately. So I think it's the perfect time to do a little bit of ASMR with Sense and Sensibility. Just a little bit of an update. My watch died. It's so sad. Um, as you want to take a look. It originally stopped at 2 p.m. today, but it's basically, I tried winding it to 6, like quarter after 6, and it's basically dead. I can't, it won't work anymore. So that means I'm basically gonna have to go shopping for a new watch. So, unfortunately, um, Walmart does not have a very good selection of watches that I want to get. It's really, really terrible. Uh, Pretty much everything I buy is a lemon. Uh, this is a lemon. It's a lemon watch. It's always breaking. And this camcorder, this tiny little thing, it's definitely a lemon. My dad bought it off of Amazon before he passed away. And I just realized that it only takes one of these. Terrible, I know. It won't take anything bigger than, it won't take anything uh, bigger than 4 megabytes. It's terrible, terrible, terrible thing. It'll only take like that much, and this is all I have. So I can't even record a good video that's longer than 3 minutes in length. I can do maybe a karaoke song, but I can't talk over it. So without further ado, um, also a little announcement. I'm doing not one, but 2 um, NaNoWriMo projects. They are the Corset Pact. It's amazing how both of these are kind of corset themed in a little bit of a way. One of them is called the Corset Pact, and the other one is called the Debutante of Cassiopeia. And how I came up with those ideas was I've always wanted to do a complete rewrite of How I Met Your Mother. And I was always wondering, how do I rewrite How I Met Your Mother if I don't even know who the future father is? It's a very, very funny little thing. Um, And then I met Alexander, and I thought, well, what's a really interesting story to tell my kids, especially since we met on online dating. We met through OkCupid. And I feel like I don't want to sound like a commercial, like a television commercial, to tell my children, oh, I just swiped right on your father and I fell in love with him. And you too can meet the love of your life by swiping right or swiping left or typey little texty texts and just pick out a super fun guy on the internet out of a catalog. And I feel like that's a dumb way to tell your kids how how you met the love of your life. And it's also not really the best thing to tell your grandkids either if you're their grandfather or grandmother. Like, oh, I swiped right on your grandfather. That kind of sounds cheap, do you think? So I thought, how can I do this? How can I explain to children, to my future children, because I'm still unmarried, very much like in a Jane Austen kind of way. I I'm very traditional, serial monogamist, and I just have to say, um, I'm old fashioned. I like meeting people in public. I don't like to meet them on the internet, really. So I was thinking, how do I tell my kids how I met the love of my life? Well, how about this? How about write it in novel format and have a New Year's Eve theme to it, especially since my dad passed away on New Year's Eve? And what if I were to tell the story in kind of a Ted Mosby kind of way? And instead of making it about, okay, Cupid, make it in a How I Met Your Mother kind of way, because How I Met Alexander is very much like the story of the yellow umbrella between Ted and Tracy McConnell, especially at the end of season 9. Like, I left this umbrella at Cindy's. You stole my umbrella. No, I bought this. I left it on St. Patrick's Day. Wait, I was at that party. Hi. Adorable, adorable. So I have to say, um, I know that's a huge spoiler, but it's like the whole yellow umbrella thing. Um, the yellow umbrella thing for the story of how we met was actually the Hussman Center at Towson University for students with autism. Alexander is on the spectrum. He is uh, on the higher end of the autism spectrum. I'm trying to be a little PC with this. He has something that's very similar to that of what used to be called Asperger's syndrome or savant syndrome. And he also has my condition, which is bipolar disorder, but it's early onset because he was diagnosed when he was a child. Me, I didn't get bipolar until I was 26. So I've always thought, bipolar and autism don't necessarily mix. But when I met him, I saw how incredible he was. I was proved wrong because it turns out that Alexander is actually a lot like the guy in this book, Colonel Brandon, who you're going to meet very shortly in chapter 4. Colonel Brandon eventually eventually falls in love with Marianne Dashwood. But Marianne Dashwood does not love him. She loves Mr. Willoughby, who actually turns out to be a total jerk. You'll find out why very shortly. If you've seen the movie that's got Kate Winslet as Marianne and Emma Thompson as her sister Eleanor, and Colonel Brandon is played by the late, great, fantastic, legendary Alan Rickman. Please rent that film. It's absolutely beautiful. And it ties in with my story of how I lost my dad, because Sense and Sensibility is about two sisters, Eleanor and Marianne, living with their mom, who's just been widowed. And they lose everything they own because their father passed away, left them destitute, but implored their cousin to assist them, and their cousin wants nothing to do with them, especially because of the evil wife that he's married to. Can't stand his wife. So, um, but like I've said before, and I hope you pay attention to my t-shirt, everyone deserves love. That includes Black Lives Matter, Trans Lives Matter, everybody, non-binary, queer, questioning, all lives matter. Everyone deserves love. I'm a true ally, folks. Please don't hurt me. I think you are all beautiful. I love you very much. Okay? Remember that. Because honestly, besides that, Jane Austen wouldn't have written this because this helps in terrible spots in their lives. And this story is about grief, personal loss, bereavement. This beautiful story. I also found out she was starting to write this, and my favorite book is NaNoWriMo. She started writing this at the time that Alexander Hamilton died. Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, and the Colonel aide-de-camp of General George Washington, who eventually became the first president of the United States. And then the star lead role in a Broadway musical. Um, Jane Austen was writing this at the time, as well as Northanger Abbey. She was still writing Lady Susan. She had just finished Lady Susan in 1804. I found out it's on Wikipedia. You can take a look. And she was also writing The Watsons, which she never finished upon her death in 1817. And her brother, Henry Austen, published all of it after she died. However, Sense and Sensibility was actually her first real, legitimate published novel. It was published in 1811, 1 year before the War of 1812. And state of Maryland, which I live in, is known for the War of 1812. The triumphant Battle of Fort McHenry, in which Francis Scott Key, true native Baltimore-born American lawyer from Frederick, Maryland, lived in Baltimore at the time, fought in the War of 1812, and taken prisoner. He wrote the national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. Kind of makes me want to write a musical called American Star, which is about Francis Scott Key. And eventually his offspring did great feats of writing, including very, very distant son of his, a descendant of Francis Scott Key, is F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby, which is my favorite book I read in high school. So anyway, here is Sense and Sensibility, Chapter 4. Also, if you, like me, are going through grieving and bereavement of a parent, as much as it pains me to say this, because I used to hate that musical so much for 5 years because I wanted Waitress to win a Tony Award in 2016, and it lost terribly, absolutely horrendously. It won absolutely nothing because I'm a true Sarah Bareilles fan. Until I found out Sarah Bareilles is actually friends with Lin-Manuel Miranda. Yikes. But I will say this. The Broadway musical Hamilton is helping me with losing my dad. So I am slowly becoming a Hamilton fan. And it's all because I'm going through a grieving process, a mourning period after losing my dad. So, yeah, okay. It's been 15 minutes of me talking. Let's get on to Sense and Sensibility. What a pity it is, Eleanor, said Marianne, that Edward should not have no taste for drawing. No taste for drawing, replied Eleanor. Why should you think so? He does not draw himself, indeed, but he has great pleasure in seeing the performances of other people, and I assure you he is by no means deficient in natural taste, though he has not had opportunities of improving it. Had he ever been in the way of learning, I think he would have drawn very well. He distrusts his own judgment in such matters so much that he is always unwilling to give his opinion on any picture, but he has an innate propriety and simplicity of taste, which in general direct him perfectly right. Marianne was afraid of offending, and said no more on the subject, but the kind of approbation which Eleanor described as excited in him by the drawings of other people was very far from that rapturous delight which in her opinion could alone be called taste. Yet, though smiling within herself at the mistake, she honoured her sister for that blind partiality to Edward which produced it. I hope, Marianne, continued Eleanor, you do not consider him as deficient in general taste. Indeed, I think I may say that you cannot, for your behaviour to him is perfectly cordial, and if that were your opinion, I am sure you could never be civil to him. Marianne hardly knew what to say. She would not she would not wound the feelings of her sister on any account, and yet to say what she did not believe was impossible. At length she replied, "Do not be offended, Eleanor, if my praise of him is not in everything equal to your sense of his merits. I have not had so many opportunities of estimating the minuter propensities of his mind, his inclinations and tastes as you have, but I have the highest opinion in the world of his goodness and sense. I think him everything that is worthy and amiable." "I am sure," replied Eleanor with a smile, "that his dearest friends could not be dissatisfied with such commendation as that. I do not perceive how you could express yourself more warmly." Marianne was rejoiced to find her sister so easily pleased. "Of his sense and goodness," continued Eleanor, "no one can, I think, be in doubt who has seen him often enough to engage him in unreserved conversation. The excellence of his understanding and his principles can be concealed only by that shyness which too often keeps him silent. You know enough of him to do justice to his solid worth, but of his minuter propensities, as you call them, you have, from peculiar circumstances, been kept more ignorant than myself. He and I have been at times thrown a good deal together, while you have been wholly engrossed on the most affectionate principle by my mother. I have seen a great deal of him, have studied his sentiments, and heard his opinions on subjects of literature and taste, and upon the whole, I venture to pronounce that his mind is well informed, his enjoyment of books exceedingly great, his imagination lively, his observations just and correct, and his taste delicate and pure. His abilities in every respect improve as much upon acquaintance as his manners and person. At first sight, his address is certainly not striking, and his person can hardly be called handsome. So the expression of his eyes, which are uncommonly good, and the general sweetness of his countenance is perceived. At present, I know him so well that I think him really handsome, or at least almost so. What say you, Marianne? I shall very soon think him handsome, Eleanor, if I do not now. When you tell me to love him as a brother, I shall no more see imperfection in his face than I now do in his heart. Eleanor stared at this declaration, and was sorry for the warmth she had been betrayed into in speaking of him. She felt that Edward stood very high in her opinion. She believed the regard to be mutual, but she required greater certainty of it to make Marianne's conviction of their attachment agreeable to her. She knew that what Marianne and her mother conjectured one moment they believed the next, that with them to wish was to hope, and to hope was to expect. She tried to explain the real state of the case to her sister. I do not attempt to deny, said she, that I think very highly of him, that I greatly esteem, that I like him. Marianne here burst forth with indignation. Esteem him, like him, cold-hearted, Eleanor. Oh, worse than cold-hearted. Ashamed of being otherwise. Use those words again, and I will leave the room this moment. Eleanor could not help laughing. Excuse me, said she, and be assured that I meant no offence to you by speaking in so quiet a way of my own feelings. Believe them to be stronger than I have declared. Believe them, in short, to be such as his merit, and the suspicion, the hope of his affection for me may warrant without imprudence or folly. But farther than this you must not believe. I am by no means assured of his regard for me. There are moments when the extent of it seems doubtful. Until his sentiments are fully known, you cannot wonder at my wishing to avoid any encouragement of my own partiality, by believing or calling it more than it is. In my heart I feel a little, scarcely any doubt of his preference, but there are other points to be considered besides his inclination. He is very far from being independent. What his mother really is, we cannot know, but from Fanny's occasional mention of her conduct and opinions, we have never been disposed to think her amiable, and I am very much mistaken if Edward is not himself aware that there would be many difficulties in his way if we were to wish to marry a woman who had not either a great fortune or high rank. Marianne was astonished to find how much the imagination of her mother and herself had outstripped the truth. "And you really are not engaged to him," said she. "But certainly soon it will happen. But two advantages will proceed from this delay. I shall not lose you so soon, and Edward will have greater opportunity of improving that natural taste for your favourite pursuit, which must be so indispensably necessary to your future felicity. Oh, he should be so far stimulated by your genius as to learn to draw himself. How delightful it would be. Eleanor had given her real opinion to her sister. She could not consider her partiality for Edward in so prosperous a state as Marianne had believed it. There was at times a want of spirits about him which, if it did not denote indifference, spoke of something almost as unpromising. A doubt of her regard, supposing him to feel it, need not give him more than inquietude. It would not be likely to produce that dejection of mind which frequently attended him. A more reasonable cause might be found in the dependent situation which forbade the indulgence of his affection. She knew that his mother neither behaved to him so as to make his home comfortable at present, nor to give him any assistance that he might form a home for himself, without strictly attending to her views for his aggrandizement. With such a knowledge as this, it was impossible for Eleanor to feel easy on the subject. She was far from depending on that result of his preference of her, which her mother and sister still considered as certain. Nay, the longer they were together, the more doubtful seemed the nature of his regard, and sometimes for a few painful minutes she believed it to be no more than friendship. But whatever might really be its limits, it was enough, when perceived by his sister, to make her uneasy, and at the same time, which was still more common, to make her uncivil. She took the first opportunity of affronting her mother-in-law on the occasion, talking to her so expressively of her brother's great expectations, of Mrs. Ferrars's resolution that both her sons should marry well, and of the danger attending any young woman who attempted to draw him in. But Mrs. Dashwood could never pretend to be unconscious, nor endeavour to be calm. She gave her an answer which marked her contempt, and intently left the room, resolving that whatever might be the inconvenience or expense of so sudden a removal, her beloved Eleanor should not be exposed another week to such insinuations. In this state of her spirits, a letter was delivered to her from the post, which contained a proposal particularly well timed. It was the offer of a small house on very easy terms, belonging to a relation of her own, a gentleman of consequence and property in Devonshire. The letter was from this gentleman himself, and written in the true spirit of friendly accommodation. He understood that she was in need of a dwelling, and though the house he now offered her was merely a cottage, he assured her that everything should be done to it which she might think necessary, if the situation pleased her. He earnestly pressed her, after giving her particulars of the house and garden, to come with her daughters to Barton Park, the place of his own residence, from whence she might judge herself whether Barton College, where the houses were in the same parish, could by any alteration be made comfortable to her. She seemed really anxious to accommodate them, and the whole of this letter was written in so friendly a style as could not fail of giving pleasure to his cousin, more especially at a moment when she was suffering under the cold and unfeeling behaviour of her nearer connections. She needed no time for deliberation or inquiry. Her resolution was formed as she read. The situation of Barton, in a county so far distant from Sussex as Devonshire, which but a few hours before would have been a sufficient objection to outweigh every possible advantage belonging to the place, was now its first recommendation. To quit the neighborhood of Norland was no longer an evil. It was an object of desire. It was a blessing in comparison of the misery of continuing her daughter-in-law's guest, and to remove forever from that beloved place would be less painful than to inhabit or visit it while such a woman was its mistress. She instantly wrote Sir John Middleton her acknowledgment of his kindness and her acceptance of his proposal, and then hastened to shew both letters to her daughters, that she might be secure of her approbation before her answer were sent. Eleanor had always thought it would be more prudent for them to settle at some distance from Norland than immediately amongst their present acquaintance. On that head, therefore, it was not for her to oppose her mother's intention of removing into Devonshire. The house, too, as described by Sir John, was on so simple a scale, and the rent so uncommonly moderate, as to leave her no right of objection on either point, and therefore, though it was not a plan which brought any charm to her fancy, though it was a removal from the vicinity of Norland Park beyond her wishes, she made no attempt to dissuade her mother from sending her letter of acquiescence. Chapter 5. No sooner was her answer dispatched than Mrs. Dashwood indulged herself in the pleasure of announcing to her son-in-law and his wife that she was provided with a house, and should incommode them no longer than till everything were ready for inhabiting it. They heard her with surprise. Mrs. John Dashwood said nothing, but her husband civilly hoped that she would not be settled far from Norland. She had great satisfaction in replying that she was going into Devonshire. Edward turned hastily towards her on hearing this, and in a voice of surprise and concern, which required no explanation to her, repeated, "Devonshire? Are you indeed going there, so far from hence? And to what part of it?" She explained the situation. It was within 4 miles northward of Exeter. "But it is but a cottage," she continued. "But I hope to see many of my friends in it. A room or two can easily be added, and if my friends find no difficulty in travelling so far to see me, I am sure I will find none in accommodating them." She concluded with a very kind invitation to Mr. and Mrs. John Dashwood to visit her at Barton, and to Edward she gave one with still greater affection, though her late conversation with her daughter-in-law had made her resolve on remaining in Norland no longer than was avoidable, and it had not produced the smallest effect on her in that point to which it principally tended, to separate Edward and Eleanor, was as far from being her object as ever, and she wished to shew Mrs. John Dashwood by this pointed invitation to her brother how totally she disregarded her disapprobation of the match. Mr. John Dashwood told his mother again and again how exceedingly sorry he was that she had taken a house at such a distance from Norland as to prevent his being of any service to her in removing her furniture. He really felt conscientiously vexed on the occasion for the every exertion to which he had limited the performance of his promise to his father by this arrangement rendered impracticable. The furniture was all sent round by water. It chiefly consisted of household linen, plate, china, and books, with a handsome pianoforte of Marianne's, Mrs. John Dashwood saw the packages depart with a sigh. She could not help feeling it hard that, as Mrs. Dashwood's income would be so trifling in comparison with their own, she should have any handsome article of furniture. I hate Mrs. Dashwood. Mrs. Dashwood took the house for a 12-month. It was ready furnished, and she might have immediate possession. No difficulty arose on either side in the new agreement, and she waited only for the disposal of her effects at Norland, and to determine her future household before she set off for the West. And this she was she was exceedingly rapid in the performance of everything that interested her was soon done. The horses which were left her by her husband had been sold soon after his death, and a pro- an opportunity now offering of disposing of her carriage, she agreed to sell that likewise at the earnest advice of her eldest daughter. For the comfort of her children, she had consulted only her own wishes. She would have kept it, but the discretion of Eleanor prevailed. Her wisdom too limited the number of her servants to 3, 2 maids and a man, with whom they were speedily provided from the amongst those who had formed their establishment at Norland. The man and one of the maids were sent off immediately into Devonshire, to prepare the house for their mistress's arrival, for as Lady Middleton was entirely unknown to Mrs. Dashwood, she preferred going directly to the cottage to being a visitor at Barton Park, and she relied so undoubtingly on Sir John's description of the house as to feel no curiosity to examine it herself until she entered it as her own. Her eagerness to be gone from Norland was preserved from dimin- diminution by the evident satisfaction of her daughter-in-law in prospect of her removal, a satisfaction which was but feebly attempted to be concealed under a cold invitation to her to defer her departure. Now was the time when her son-in-law's promise to his father might with particular propriety be fulfilled, since he had neglected to do it on first coming to the estate. Their quitting his house might be looked on as the most suitable period for its accomplishment. But Mrs. Dashwood began shortly to give over every hope of the kind, and to be convinced, from the general drift of his discourse, that his assistance extended no farther than their maintenance for 6 months at North. He so frequently talked of the increasing expenses of housekeeping, and of the perpetual demands upon his purse which a man of any consequence in the world was beyond calculation exposed to, that he seemed rather to stand in need more than money himself, than to have any design of giving money away. A very few weeks from the day which brought Sir John Middleton's first letter to Moorland, everything was so far settled in their future abode as to enable Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters to begin their journey. Many were the tears shed by them in their last adieus to a place so much beloved. "Dear, dear Norland," said Marianne, as she wandered alone before the house, on the last evening of their being there. "When shall I cease to regret you, when learn to feel a home elsewhere? Oh, happy house! Could you know what I suffer now viewing you from the spot, from whence perhaps I may view you no more, and you, ye well-known trees! But you will continue the same. No leaf will decay because we are removed, nor any branch become motionless, although we can observe you no longer. No, you will continue the same, unconscious of the pleasure or the regret you occasion, and insensible of any change in those who walk under your shade, but who will remain to enjoy you." I have to stop there because my battery on my computer is about to die, so I'm going to attempt to reach for my cable. It's on the floor. Actually, it's almost 40 minutes now. my life is all up in boxes. And as you can see, that's a little poster of my dad. I remember him. Oh, wow, 14%. Okay, well, uh, I need to be going. So, just one thing. Debutante of Cassiopeia, I forgot to mention this. It's a historical fiction, my first one. And it's going to be really interesting because it does kind of involve Hamilton in a way, but Hamilton is not in the story because it takes place in 1820, which is about 16 years after he died. So, Elizabeth Schuyler is a widow at this time, but my main character, Marina, does meet Elizabeth Hamilton Schuyler, who is the widow of Alexander Hamilton. And there's mention of Graham Wyndham, which is the foster care center, which is actually at that time the very first orphanage in New York, eventually becomes a foster care system, which is a very, very good cause for foster children and foster families. And it's an adoption center for kids who have no families. It's a wonderful, wonderful cause. Um, and it also mentions ending slavery, which I'm very, very strong supporter of anti-slavery, anti-discrimination of all sorts. I'm a nice person. I don't like discrimination. I think any discrimination is absolutely psychotic. I mean, for anybody who is human should not be discriminated against. I mean, you don't discriminate dogs, right? All dogs are cute. Cute puppies are adorable. I have I have a koala bear. I have you're gonna see this. Um, my bed is practically my desk. But I have a Stitch from Lilo and Stitch. I have lots of bunnies, tons of bunnies, all different colors. Um, this is probably the fluffiest bunny I own. Snowy the bunny. And I have a Toothless, the dragon from How to Train Your Dragon. He has a red tail. And this is I love long kisses. And the collar on him is a reminder of when I had my favorite dog, D'Artagnan, when he was a puppy. He died when he was 5 years old. He died on Valentine's Day from kidney failure. He was still just the cutest little baby. And I still have his collar from when he was a puppy. And I keep it on this little guy all times. And he's so huggable and lovable. Just like my little baby man, my littlest musketeer. And he was a chocolate dad. So, and I keep them on my bed in case I need something to hold on to. But usually, when I'm visiting Alexander and I stay the night, I'm always holding him because getting over dad is the hardest thing to do. And my coping mechanisms are holding the bunny as I fall asleep, try not to have any nightmares, reading Jane Austen, and this is especially about grieving because in Sense and Sensibility, the dad does die of illness. And all three girls, including the mother, the two sisters, Eleanor and Marianne, and the youngest child, Margaret, are all destitute because they are left with absolutely nothing because the entire fortune goes to their cousin, Henry, whose wife is a total biatch. Can't stand Mrs. Dashwood. She's absolutely horrible. Um, and their relative, Mr. Ferrers, very, very distant relative, Mr. Ferrers, who's like twice removed, no relation to Eleanor because they're from a previous marriage of Mr. Dashwood. Um, Mr. Ferrers um, is um, the love interest to Eleanor, but Mrs. Dashwood does not want them seeing each other at all. She's like, Mr. Ferrers needs to marry someone rich. He should marry no one until he finds a rich girl. And she doesn't realize that love is more important than money. And, you know, my shirt says, love is more important than money. Nobody should be discriminated by how much money they have. Love knows no boundaries. Sense and Sensibility is really, really great to get through anything. Debutante of Cassiopeia takes place in 1820, 3 years after Jane Austen passed away. And there's a lot of tie-ins to Jane Austen, but there's also a lot of ties into Eliza Hamilton and, of course, Alexander Hamilton himself, even though he's not in the story. He's been dead for years at this point. But it's all about a little orphan named Marina, who's 27 years old, a totally brand new orphan. She's been orphaned at 27. She's never been married. People call her an old maid. She's destitute, and nobody will take care of her until she meets a captain, a very wealthy, charming captain, a man called um, Alec. Can't remember his name at the top of my head. I need to pull up my flash drive and look at the file. He is a very generous man who wants to give, um, who wants to help Marina. And as he learns more about her, he's absolutely smitten by her beauty and her wit and her charm. And he's like absolutely in love with her. And he doesn't care that she's an orphan. He wants to marry her. And he seeks out his dear friend Elizabeth Schuyler, the widow of Alexander Hamilton, to take care of her. And just like she did for him, because the wealthy captain is also a foster child. He was orphaned, he was abandoned, and he's given to a very wealthy family, but he sees Eliza as his aunt. And so he asks, Dear Auntie Eliza, please adopt Marina and give her to me as my wife. And in turn, they work together to end slavery, raise funds in DC for the Washington Monument, and also help Graham Windham as the first orphanage and the first foster care system of the United States. It's really awesome. And in case you didn't see my tweet already, Alexander put this in one of my Easter eggs in an Easter basket that he gave me yesterday on Easter Sunday. He says, this is an IOU. It is in the mail. I bought it online from eBay. You're getting this as a kind of a late Easter present. It's yours. And it's basically a printout of the biography of Eliza Hamilton. I need this for research. I'm not reading the Ron Chernow biography. It's too long. I think this is better because Eliza's a more fascinating character than her husband because Alexander Hamilton didn't live very long. He only lived like 50 years, and then Aaron Burr killed him in a duel. Ugh. But that thing is really immense. It's a massive biography. This is about a woman who grew old, lived to 97, died of natural causes, lived a very long life, but in life and even in death, she got her children to tell the story of their father's legacy. And she did so many things of philanthropy. She was a humanitarian. She was an incredible person. And I'm a feminist when it comes to history. This is incredible. So I am definitely reading this. I am a true feminist when it comes to history. I like reading history on women, especially. The first women who did this, the first women to do that other thing. One of my favorite movies about women's history is Hidden Figures. The first three Black women who served for NASA and eventually got NASA to be a completely integrated facility, especially with the whole uh, discriminated, segregated bathrooms. They tore down the segregated bathrooms and said, I don't care if you're black or white, you can use the bathroom just like anybody else. Nobody discriminate each other. And that's how NASA became integrated and said, these women need to use the bathroom. Just go to the one that's closest to you. You do not need to run down an entire mile to get to another bathroom that's designated for your skin tone. Doesn't matter. Go to the bathroom. You're human. Humans need the restroom. Just go. And it's an incredible thing. I love Hidden Figures. It's such a beautiful film. It's a tearjerker, and it's based on a true story. It's about the first three Black women who worked for NASA and put the first men on the moon. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a wonderful story. And so, I'm a true feminist when it comes to history. I love women's history. I think it's fascinating, especially since this is my favorite dead author, Jane Austen. Thank you all. I love you. Please stay safe. Uh, I completely support justice for George Floyd. I know that's going on. Prayers for DMX. I know the guy who wrote the rap song "X Gon' Give It to You" for that was used for Deadpool. I love that movie. I love the song too. And I feel so terrible that DMX is not doing well and he's on life support. That sucks. It sucks hearing all the stuff down on Twitter. Everybody just take a breather, relax. We'll get there soon. I can't wait for 2021 to be over because it's killing me. And really, you're all just so beautiful. I really do love you. Please take time to heal. Thank you. Good night.